Juri has a lot of problems with her toolkit. A lot of these things I've talked about in previous videos, but let's add one more to the list. There's a lot of issues with frame data in hurt boxes that just don't make sense, and it leads to consistency problems. But this one is just goofy. In Street Fighter 6, chain attacks are mostly gapless, so you can't press buttons in between it. And Juri can chain her crouching light punch, her standing light punch, or her crouching light kick. And Ryu can do the same with his crouching light punch, his standing light punch, or his crouching light kick. But something weird happens. Crouching light punch, no problem. Standing light punch doesn't work, but still chains. The crouching light kick, what? Doesn't work. In fact, I get punish countered. Why is that? Let's first talk about how chains work in this game. So every move has startup, active, and recovery. The startup frames are the amount of time it takes before a move becomes active. The active frames are the frames that actually can collide with the opponent. And the recovery is the amount of frames that must pass by before you can attack again. A move must go through the recovery frames first before you can go into startup of your next move, hence the term recovery. There are cases where you can bypass recovery and cancel into a special move. This is called a special cancel. I canceled the crouching heavy punch into a heavy fuha. Crouching heavy punch did not have to complete before I did the fuha. Certain moves can chain, like Juri's crouching light punch. Instead of bypassing recovery, what it does instead is after the recovery frames, it bypasses the startup of the next attack. Let's see what happens when Ryu tries to counterattack. Ryu couldn't start up his next attack because the frame in which he would have started up, my active frame, was already out. So if chain attacks create small gaps where the opponent can't attack through, why does Juri's crouching light kick chain fail? Let's look at the frame data. Crouching light kick is -1 on block. Maybe it's the fact that she's minus. Maybe it just doesn't allow for that. Her crouching light punch is also -1. But even though it's -1, it seems to work just fine. It could be because it's a crouching light kick. Ryu's is -1 and it's a crouching light kick. Does this work? Yup, works fine. And with Ryu, we can see why. The first crouching light kick starts up, is active, and recovers. The opponent is +1, so they're able to start up their next attack. But since our Ryu doesn't have startup, it becomes active on the next frame, and they get hit right here. This makes sense. It's not a function of speed. We see this with Aki. Aki is -2 on her crouching light kick. That makes Ryu +2. So 1 frame, 2 frame, but Aki's next light kick becomes active on the 3rd frame. With Ken, something interesting happens. His crouching light kick, although chainable, is -3. Ken would be -3, Ryu would be +3, and we see that 3-frame gap right here. That also means Ken's crouching light kick will become active on the same frame that Ryu's retaliation crouching light punch will become active, which should cause a trade. And we see that trade right here. Both moves become active on the same frame. Mathematically, this makes sense. If you're ahead by 3 frames, your attack comes out on the 4th frame. So let's look at some of the casts that have a -3 crouching light kick that is also chainable. Menon, like Ken, should trade, but it wins out. Honda, -3, wins out. Zangief, -3. Surely his doesn't win out. Well, actually, no, there's no gap at all. Ryu can't press a button at all in between that. Even though we're -3, there's actually no gap at all in between his crouching light kicks. So how are characters -3 and gapless, or -3 and winning, when if we see Ken who's -3, he loses? Mathematically, the math isn't mathing. Let's go back to Menon. Menon's attack becomes active on frame 5. It's active for 2 frames and then goes into recovery for 13 frames. Menon recovers 3 frames after Ryu does, which puts Ryu 3 frames ahead. Ryu's quickest attack is 4 frames, so it becomes active on this box here. But let's look at what actually happens. Instead of 13 frames of recovery, if we look, Menon's crouching light kick actually only has 11 frames of recovery, which allows her crouching light kick to chain and become active sooner. It should recover on this frame here and become active on this frame, which would allow Ryu's attack to become active on the same frame, causing a trade. But since some of the recovery is cut, it becomes active 2 frames sooner, beating Ryu out. We can see the same thing for Zangief. Has 3 frames of startup, becomes active on the 4th frame, active for 3 frames, then has 12 frames of recovery. If chain, should become active on this frame here, and Ryu should start up 1, 2, 3, 4, and become active on the same frame, causing a trade. Ryu will try to attack after the first hit. But what actually happens is that there's not enough space in between the first and second hit. Ryu is forced to block that whole time because there's not enough gap for him to slip and attack in. 12 frames of recovery, 8 frames of recovery. 4 frames of recovery was cut, so it becomes active sooner. Ken's crouching light kick has 4 frame startup frames, becomes active on the 5th frames, active for 3 frames, and has 10 frames of recovery. But Ken, when he changes his crouching light kick, does not get that reduction for his recovery frames, which collides with Ryu's 4th active frame. Since Ken doesn't have that reduction, he trades with Ryu. Now that we know recovery frames for chain attacks can sometimes change, how does it affect Juri? Juri's crouching light kick has 4 startup frames, becomes active on the 5th frame, and has 3 active frames. Juri's crouching light kick recovers in 8 frames. She is also -1, which means Ryu's attack should become active on this frame here. Juri's attack should become active all the way back here. Let's see what actually happens. Juri's attack recovers in 8 frames, but when chained, they add 2 frames to it, which allows for 4-frame attacks to collide and trade on that 4th frame. Juri should become active where the 1 is in the number 10, which means she should stuff Ryu's attack on this frame here. But since they add those 2 frames, they collide. I went through the whole cast to see if there's any other exceptions other than Juri. And what I found was we had 3 exceptions. We had Jamie, Ken, and Ed. Ed was an exception because technically his crouching low attack is his crouching light punch, not his crouching light kick. And trying out his crouching light punch, it worked fine. Jamie and Ken are the only exceptions where their chainable crouching light kicks don't beat out the next attack. And that's because their recovery frames don't get adjusted. They're -3, their next attack comes out on the 4th frame, which trades with 4-frame attacks. I'm curious what the design choice is for this. Why do some chainable attacks get less recovery frames, like Jamie's crouching light punch, but then his crouching light kick doesn't get that same change? 11 frames of recovery, and on chain, 11 frames of recovery. But even more curious is Juri. Her crouching light punch recovers in 8 frames, but chainable, 7 frames. Her standing light punch recovers in 7 frames, chainable, 6 frames. I'm wondering what the design choice is because even if they don't cut the frames on the recovery frames, it still would stuff the next attack. Instead of it recovering in 7 frames, it recovers in 6 frames and goes into the next attack. But this is where it gets wicked. This attack has 7 frames recovery, but on chain has 6 frames of recovery. If I chain into my next attack, it should become active on this frame here because standing light punch after a chain has only 6 frames of recovery. Let's look at what happens if I chain standing light punch into crouching light kick. It becomes active on the frame afterwards. There is the 7th recovery frame again. 6 frames recovery on a chain, 6 frames recovery on a chain, 7 frames recovery on a chain. Does it depend on what button you're chaining into? I think it does. In this case here, Ken recovers in 7 frames. On a chain, 6 frames. Chaining into a crouching light kick, 7 frames. 10 frames of recovery, 7 frames of recovery, which would make this gapless. So 7 frames of recovery, maybe it's going to be 8 frames? Yeah, there it is. So I guess my theory is if you have a chain where the recovery is, for an example, 7 frames, if your crouching light kick is 5 frames, it adds on an extra frame of recovery. Maybe it's because it's a 5-frame attack. And we see it at play on this string here. 2 standing light punches and a crouching light kick as a chain. First standing light punch recovers in 6 frames. The second standing light punch recovers in 7 frames because it's going into the crouching light kick. So it's not just a recovery of a move, it's also what move you plan to go into next. But that still doesn't account for Juri's crouching light kick being -1 and on a chain adding 2 additional frames. Juri is the only character in the game that gets their crouching light kick increased to that level where you can't chain your attacks. And I question, why can't Jamie and Ken do it? I would love to know the design philosophy of this. My assumption, Capcom doesn't know and doesn't care, or doesn't think is an issue. I'm always a fan of consistency and logic. If you have a basic understanding of frame data, it goes out the window when you look at this situation. I use this phrase a lot, Juri's an outlier. Is this game breaking? Absolutely not. Juri's still a fine character. But how many of these small non-issues are going to slowly start to add up? It's death by 1,000 cuts. And I made this video not to complain, but I look at these things as bugs. Not in the sense that it's not working properly. Maybe it's an oversight and not a bug. But I feel like these inconsistencies should be pointed out. UltimateFrameData.com has not adjusted their frame data from the last patch. And if you look here, crouching light kick for Ryu is -3 on block. And that was changed. Ryu's crouching light kick is now -2. And we see that here. Advantage on block changed from -3 to -1. Since Ryu's recovery frames are not altered if he does a chain, that means it used to work like Ken's crouching light kick. I'm wondering if there was a trade in this situation before the patch. So if Capcom recognized that as an issue, why did they not recognize that as an issue for everyone else? If that was an issue, why did no one check and see Juri? Juri already has problems connecting 3 lights on standing opponents. And even if she makes them block low on a crouching light kick, they can still walk backwards after the second attack. So as a means to not get them to walk backwards, maybe using 3 light attacks would be good. This works on 2 light punches and light kick, and technically she could do it on 3 light attacks, but the opponent doesn't have to respect those light attacks. In fact, in some cases, they get punish countered, which means they're plus in this situation. A friend of mine, Hanuma, brought me this problem. So this video is just me bringing to light something that I think should be looked at. Is this in line with the design for what Capcom wants from the game? Is Juri in line and the rest of the cast is not in line? Or is Juri not in alignment and should be changed? Same goes for Jamie and Ken. If you like these kind of videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. I love learning how this game works. Understanding why things work a certain way allows us to make informed decisions. Knowledge is power. Thanks for watching the whole video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good one.